Why work with startups? Why would you work with startups as partners and suppliers? There are three different perspectives that we can take on that. Let's start with the micro. Back in the days, people thought about startups as those are two students in their dorm room, have a eureka moment and start building some company. The reality today is that startups look very different. Those are people that have professionally built companies, that have degrees at Ivy League schools, and most importantly, that are funded by top-tier VCs with millions and millions in funding. These startups have one huge advantage compared to a business unit inside your corporation, and that is focus. They have the privilege to focus on one particular problem within your value chain compared to your business units that need to spread their focus among many. And that focus plus that funding often leads to situations where a startup with 40, 100 people focused on one problem has significantly more funding available to them to solve that problem than any business unit in your corporation, even though you work with budgets in the billions. So that is reason number one why it makes sense to work with startups. Their immense focus on sub-problems or individual problems in your value chain that you can solve effectively with them. The second perspective is the macro perspective that we can take. The macro perspective looks at where is money for new innovation coming from and going to, most importantly. On the one hand, we can look at R&D budgets. How have R&D budgets with the intent to create innovation evolved over the last 10, 20 years? We see that there is growth, but it's quite insignificant. On the other hand, if we look at venture capital, how that has grown over the same period, we see that a few years ago, venture capital significantly overtook global R&D budgets compared to them, showing you that investors, financially driven people are seeing that there seems to be a higher return on money invested for innovation with startups within R&D and corporations. That's not to say that startups will replace R&D and internal corporate innovation, but it's a complement, and we're currently finding a new balance. So all of that venture capital, those billions that get invested every year, you can see them as external R&D budget that you can leverage. And the third perspective is this macro perspective, but at a very concrete one. Let's look at those companies that are working together with the largest amount of startups. And let's look at how much venture capital these startups have raised. If we compare that to the R&D budget that these companies are investing themselves, then we see that there are companies out there like BMW, like Siemens, like the Volkswagen Group that manage to significantly supplement or increase their R&D budget by working together with startups. Now, of course, you cannot exactly compare them one by one because your own R&D budget you of course have significantly more control over than with a startup. Nonetheless, that is real capital that you can leverage to develop innovation towards your needs. And that is exactly why it makes sense to work with startups at an earlier stage, because at that time, as an early customer, you have a lot of power over where is that startup moving, how is their product roadmap evolving, and how is that venture capital that this startup has raised going to be invested.